All right, welcome back to the DTVC Extra podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and we are going to look at Deadpool and Wolverine. This is going to be a special one-off, which I was looking back through the archives and realized that I've done one-offs on Deadpool before. So in 2017, while I was on hiatus, I did a one-off on the first Deadpool movie because I'd finally seen it. So I guess it came out in 2016. I finally saw it in 2017. And so I did a one-off thinking that I was going to maybe at least get the podcast back on track, but didn't happen. And then in 2019, when I was coming back from hiatus in earnest there, I did an episode on Blackwater, China Salesman, and Deadpool 2. And that was at that time when I was kind of getting guests and trying to get everything back in order. So it was another solo episode. So I guess with Deadpool, I've done solo episodes with him before. And earlier this week, I put out the episode on Equalizer 2000 with Will from Exploding Helicopter. I said this episode was going to be a half hour. It might be a little longer than that because I realized just sort of getting into the nuts and bolts that there's a little bit more meat on that bone there than just a half hour worth talking about there. So we'll see though. I'm going to try not to go too far over a half hour. I don't want to get into a really stretch. So when I say over a half hour, maybe 45 minutes, maybe something like that. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Now, and I think, obviously the background piece of it, I think, people have given me positive feedback on enjoying kind of the background and me putting these movies in context. And I guess, with this one, I don't want to go too far. I think about back when Deadpool was had his first appearance in 1990. I was roughly, I had kind of just started collecting comics around that same time. I was more into the Spider-Man books, but seeing Deadpool and his first appearance was New Mutants 98. I don't remember catching that exactly. I'd kind of I think it was New Mutants 100 because that was such a big deal when I first started collecting that. A book ended, right? And you want to get that huge it was a milestone issue for 100, but also the book it ended. And then I kind of went back and picked up some others. I don't think I had New Mutants 87, which was Cable's first appearance, but definitely 98, the Deadpool one. I think I did have that one. I don't know what happened to it. I mean, the prices on those ones shot up, right? It was 100 initially was the expensive one, but then when X-Force gets going and Cable and Deadpool were so popular, 98 and 87 really jumped up. And I think 87 was worth a lot more than 98 for a period, and now it's probably flipped. Because I would say right now with the Marvel's top three, I would say it would be Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Deadpool. And I think when I was collecting in the late 80s, it was still Spider-Man and Wolverine. And I think one of the interesting things is that at that late 80s period, anti-heroes were really popular. And with DC, right, we can think about the fact that Batman overtook Superman. Part of it was the Tim Burton movie, of course, that was a part of it. But I think there was overall this sense of wanting these darker, grittier anti-heroes. And with Marvel, of course, they had created two in 1974. They had Wolverine and they had Punisher, which were really popular at that time. I think the reason why Wolverine doesn't overtake Spider-Man for the number one Marvel character at that time was that Todd McFarlane was doing such a great job with the Amazing Spider-Man book, and he was creating this grittier, edgier version of Spider-Man there that people were really resonating with. And so that's why Spider-Man managed to keep his place in the hierarchy. I can't think of who would have been number three, because I always talk about with DC that probably Wonder Woman's number three. I don't know with Marvel at that time, maybe Captain America or Hulk. I don't know. And it takes a little time, of course, before Deadpool becomes that number three. But I think the thing especially for people my age who were collecting at that time, there's a sense almost that Deadpool is our Spider-Man. And I know Rob Liefeld had talked about that he was creating Cable and Deadpool as a way to compete with Wolverine and Spider-Man that was so popular at that time that it was almost essentially he was creating his own Cable or his own Wolverine and Spider-Man with Cable and Deadpool. But the other thing that I think about and why I always think of Deadpool as maybe being our Spider-Man is that all of these characters were these heritage characters that have been around for a long time. So in the late 80s, early 90s, you start hitting these big anniversaries. So you get for Captain America, it's even more so, right? You're getting the 50th anniversary of Captain America. But then you're getting the 30th anniversary of all of those Marvel characters that came out in the early 60s. And so there's always that sense of these characters having existed long before we were around. But to have a popular one that we could see when the first appearance was, we remembered the first appearance. We remembered the early appearances. I remember that early period of X-Force. And even like other books that had anything that had Deadpool in it, we all had to get it. We all had to grab it. Another one I remember was a book called Nomad, which I believe Nomad was a version of Bucky. So we think of Bucky now, right, as Winter Soldier from the MCU, but I think Nomad was another version, like he had left Captain America as his sidekick and had turned into Nomad. And that book was dying. It wasn't going to last much longer. And I guess it's like one last ditch attempt to kind of, either it was a last ditch attempt to like save the book, or if it was kind of one of those deals where like the book is done anyway, so all bets are off. Let's just put whoever we can in there. And Deadpool was in an issue of it, and we bought that issue of Nomad. We had no other reason to be buying Nomad comics, and we bought that one. So that's how popular Deadpool was. Now, I get out of collecting comics in the early 90s. Shortly after Deadpool had his one shot it was like a 4-issue miniseries. I think it was in '93, and I was close to being done with comics at that point. I remember they killed Superman off. I really wasn't doing much with DC at that time anyway. I mean, the thing was, comics had gotten to be too expensive. It was there were always like these reverse hologram covers and all those kinds of things. But also, you get McFarlane, Liefeld, Jim Lee, when they break off from Marvel and they form Image, suddenly it was like I had to buy the Image stuff and the Marvel stuff that I was already collecting. And then Valiant comes around with Magnus Robot Fighter and Turok Dinosaur, and I was like, oh, you got to buy those books too. And I didn't have the money for any of it, and I just kind of gave up. I think I kind of turned more to sports at that point, even though there was still that geeky side of me that loved comic books. And that geeky side of me did kind of come back in like the early 2000s when I graduated from college and had a little extra money. I got back into collecting for a short period. It was like maybe for like a year or so. And I bought up all the Deadpools that had come out, because I guess Deadpool had his own book, I guess maybe in the mid to late 90s. And I don't know if it ran for like 100 issues. And I bought I think I got like 95 of them or so. And read through them all, was really interested in them. Definitely kind of cool to see his progression. And one of the things, as I was talking about earlier about this whole thing of anti-heroes in the late 80s, Deadpool wasn't an anti-hero, he was a villain. But he was so popular as a villain that they had to kind of convert him into an anti-hero. They had to kind of bring him there because he was so great. And as we get into the 2000s, at that same time that I was buying up those issues, right, Marvel is taking off with their movies. So we get Blade, right? We get Blade at the late 90s, and then we get X-Men, then we get Spider-Man. And I think from a comic book fan standpoint, we'd seen Superman done well with 1 and 2, but then 3 and 4 were iffy. We'd seen Batman done well with 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4 were kind of iffy. But there was a sense that overall that the movie industry couldn't do comic books well. They couldn't do them justice. And now that we are seeing them do them justice somewhat, now there were still some issues. Like, for example, the Spider-Man that we were seeing, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, as much as we enjoyed watching those movies, they were still just the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, right? It wasn't like Spider-Man was teaming up with anybody. Daredevil would be appearing in, it was a Fox movie, right? And it was almost like Fox is trying to sort of capitalize on the success that Marvel was having with Spider-Man. I was like, well, Daredevil looks kind of Spider-Man-ish, right? So maybe we can do something with that. But he was his own thing too, right? It wasn't like there was a Daredevil hanging out with Spider-Man in the Sam Raimi movies. There were no other major heroes that were showing up in those. And, same with the X-books, right? The X-Men ones, it was just the X-Men characters that Fox wanted to use. Magneto and Professor X and all of that. And Wolverine, of course, was the big one. But they were still siloed. They were still kind of not what we were expecting. And I don't know that there was an expectation of a Deadpool in one of these movies. I wanted to see it. It was something I was excited for. I was reading in the history that I guess Ryan Reynolds was already on it from around the time he was doing Blade Trinity, because of course I think there's that description in one of the Deadpools where he describes himself as like a cross between Ryan Reynolds and a Sharpay or something like that. That's how he describes his look, and Ryan Reynolds was like, oh, I'd like to play this guy. This guy looks interesting. And I guess he and New Line were actually planning to do a Deadpool, but Fox owned the rights. So then kind of fast forward to the late 2000s, and Fox is like, well, we're going to start doing this X-Men Origins Wolverine thing. Yeah, I think Deadpool would be a character we'd like to include in that, and Ryan Reynolds, he's the guy we'd like you to play it. And this is when our old fears about how comic book movies are made resurface, right? Because we see the worst possible version of Deadpool we ever could have gotten. I don't know what made them decide to do that fugazi Deadpool they did in X-Men Origins Wolverine. It kind of hurt all around, right? Because it hurt their brand. They had to recover with the X-Men First Class, which I think they do a good job with Fox. They were planning to do other origin movies, right? X-Men Origins Wolverine was supposed to be the first of many, and they kind of convert the Magneto one into X-Men First Class. They kind of get the brand back a little bit after that. And, of course, in 2013, the Wolverine movie that they make is a little bit better as well. But there's still a sense, I guess, of wanting to do a Deadpool. And there was a lot of back and forth kind of from that 2009 period until we actually get Deadpool in 2016. And I guess maybe you could think of like a 5-year window because, at 2014 is when they start developing the film. But in that 5 years, there was this back and forth with like Fox not really sure what they want this movie to be. Of course, right, you're seeing the Marvel Cinematic Universe is putting a lot of pressure on the other major studios, right? So in 2009, when Fox does X-Men Origins Wolverine, at that point we just had Iron Man in 2008, there was no real reason for Fox to fear the Marvel Studios producing their own films because they would look at it and say, like, the best character you got is what? Iron Man, Captain America, I guess Hulk, but you're doing that with Universal. Like, none of these guys can touch Wolverine, right? We've got the number one Marvel property, right? And I guess Sony would look at the same thing, like they've got Spider-Man. What are we worried about the Marvel Studios, right? We're not concerned with them, and of course. Warner and DC would think the same thing with Batman, right? They wouldn't be concerned about anything like that. So there's probably no impetus to say like, oh man, Deadpool's the number 3 most popular character, right? From Fox's standpoint, we should be like really pushing this to make money. It's like, okay, we screwed him up in 2009. Why we did that, I don't know. Again, it doesn't make any sense. But okay. Ryan Reynolds is coming to us with this idea. I mean, Ryan Reynolds is a big enough star. We're going to take his calls. We're going to listen to what he says. But, do we want an R-rated version of Deadpool? Like, I don't know. Do we need this movie that badly? And I think there's probably also a sense, too, that after the failure of X-Men Origins Wolverine, that maybe they're going to not go as big at that point. But then, of course, right, we get to, 2012, right, 2013, where now... it's a new world. It's a new world for comic book movies. And Fox, I guess, they had some options there when Avengers comes out and really kind of takes the comic book world by storm. DC, right? DC had some options ahead of it, and what it decided to do was, okay, we just made this Man of Steel movie. Now we're going to start bringing in our other characters. We've got our own Avengers, right? We've got the Justice League. Batman is this one that we've kind of kept separate from everything for a while. Let's bring Batman in. Let's put Batman and Superman together with Wonder Woman, and let's see what that does. And it was successful, right? They were kind of okay. And then, of course, it was successful until it wasn't, right? But at least they were kind of trying something. Spider-Man, they were, like, really concerned, of course, and they were, like, there were some delays in doing Spider-Man 4 with Sam Raimi, and they realized, like, we need to get something out there as soon as possible. And Raimi says, well, I'm not going to do Spider-Man 4 if you're going to rush me on it, and which makes sense, because when has a rushed movie ever done well? So they reboot Spider-Man. And I think as they're kind of rebooting Spider-Man, right, what they notice is that there's a cap or there's a ceiling for their rebooted Spider-Man. But if they can marry their Spider-Man with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that, hey, and that's what they do, right? And of course, they get much bigger success that way. But with Fox's standpoint, I guess they probably thought, well, we've got Wolverine. And I don't know that Disney would have offered the same opportunity with Wolverine that they did with Spider-Man. I wouldn't have been surprised if they did. I mean, can you imagine if they had Hugh Jackman, right, and their Wolverine movies as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Would have been a huge thing, right? Or if Fox had even offered it with Deadpool. But one of the things Fox could have done with the characters that they had, whereas Sony with Spider-Man, they only really had Spider-Man and I guess like the kind of the ancillary characters in the Spider-Verse. But it might have been harder to kind of pull off the same kind of Avengers thing that the DC and Warner were going to do. But Fox had it all in front of them to do that, right? They could have had a series of movies that all came together with a big team up, and Deadpool could have been a major part of that, but they just never saw it right. So when they finally do give the green light to making this this Deadpool movie. One, they're completely scared off by the idea of it being R-rated, and they actually were going to push on that being R-rated. And it took like some big names. If you look in the Wikipedia, I think it's like David Fincher and James Cameron who are like, no, let them make the movie the way that they want to make it, because it looks good like this, the fact that Fox needed to be convinced by those two just blows my mind. That like they couldn't have just understood. I mean, I don't know how they wouldn't have known what they had for a property when Deadpool was so popular. And I mean, he really was that popular. Like I'd see kids wearing Deadpool shirts. I didn't see kids wearing, I don't know, Magneto shirts or, whoever else, Professor X shirts or whatever, right? Or, and even they weren't even wearing Wolverine shirts to the extent that they were wearing Deadpool shirts. Deadpool was that popular, and an R-rated version was what people wanted. I also don't understand the whole R-rated thing, right? And there's all these numbers where it's like, oh, the best R-rated movie of all time, that like PG-13 seems to not have the same cap that R-rated does. And I guess I don't necessarily get that, because you have such a huge amount of the population that's over 18 that goes to see movies, that I would feel like you should be, if you make the movie good enough, you should be able to get enough people for it. And of course, what ends up happening, right, when they finally do, they push back on the budget, right? I guess like they were cutting the budget down even up until the very end. Like they were getting ready to shoot, and Fox is like, no, we're going to take another $8 million off that. I mean, just absolute lack of foresight on their part. And to some extent, you say, like, I don't know what the details were of them getting bought out by Disney, but as you read this stuff, and it's just a complete ignorance of what they had for a property and how they kept pushing back and not embracing this thing. It blows my mind, because of course Deadpool comes out and is like the #1 X movie until Deadpool 2 comes out and is even better than it, right? And so it's almost like this thing of like, hey, you were right? Like, hey, we were all right. Like what, why couldn't you keep going? And I think there was a sense that maybe Fox was understanding, like, okay, yes, we probably should keep embracing this Deadpool thing. But of course, before part 2 comes out, right? Disney comes along and buys out the 20th Century arm of Fox. Now they own the rights to it. And Iger had said, like, oh yeah, we'll make a third Deadpool movie, but it'll be PG-13. And then Kevin Feige's like, no, we're going to do an R-rated Deadpool. But, I think there was a sense even then that, like, part of the thing with Disney was that Disney didn't want to admit that the X the X properties were worth as much as the ones that they had. And of course, remember, for years they were diminishing the X properties within the comic books, so that any kids that were reading comics would be seeing these sort of underpowered heroes as the X characters, whereas the Avengers were kind of more prominent in there. And then it's like they had to turn around and be like, oh no, now we got to make these X characters part of the Marvel universe and make them part of the the rest of our characters. And there's this whole thing about how are they going to put them back in, how are they going to make them work. And of course, what we all know what happens last year, where Guardians of the Galaxy was a good one for them, but otherwise, Ant-Man versus Wasp was underwhelming. The Marvels was like their worst, financial one. Secret Invasion didn't do well, and you can kind of really go back, I think, to like when they roll out Disney Plus in Phase 4 and they start doing the TV shows. I think there was initial enjoyment of the TV shows, like, oh, WandaVision, that's WandaVision I think had the same kind of buzz as like Mandalorian, but there's a fatigue setting in kind of overall, and when you go back, if you look on Wikipedia and you see the lists of TV shows and things like that, you're just like, wow, they were doing like all of that stuff, and they were expecting everybody to watch all of that stuff and know all of that stuff to see all their different movies. You can see how people pushed back and were like, I'm done. I don't necessarily need to do this. And and I think too, it's interesting to think about like with the Disney Plus, with their streaming subscriptions, that they were starting to lose subscribers, or not, they were losing money on that. And I think that's part of it, is like, if nobody cares about watching the TV shows that you're putting out, then why would they get it? Because most of the big Marvel fans, very few of them are like me, where I need Disney Plus to watch the movies, right? Most people own them and have them that way. But anyway, yeah, so we get to this past year, 2023, where Marvel has a bad year. Bob Iger steps in and kind of pulls everything off the slate. We also have the strikes, the writer strike and the actor strike. So there's a sense of like, okay, we're going to really streamline this thing down. And what's the one project that we've got in the works that we could release next year? Oh, it's the Deadpool one, right? It's the third Deadpool movie. So that's when they slap Wolverine on it. They pay out this extra money to get Hugh Jackman in the film. And it's this eagerly anticipated thing. But I think for us fans, especially for myself, who, remembers Deadpool's first appearance, was a huge fan of his stuff, still is a fan of Deadpool, still, right, I see him as our Spider-Man, and I think I like Spider-Man as a character better than Deadpool. I mean, Spider-Man's kind of just always been one of my favorites, just always really liked, his character, like the villains, the heroes, all, the kind of people that work with him, all that kind of thing. I've always kind of liked that one more. But I think of Deadpool as our Spider-Man because he's the one that, when you think of, Spider-Man coming out, whatever, it was 62 or whatever, 63, and it's like, 30 years ago. 1990 is our 61 or 62 for when Deadpool came out. And that's why I kind of feel of him, I feel he's ours. Like when younger people talk about Deadpool, I can feel like, yeah, I remember when he first came out. I remember his first appearance. And I think the thing about this movie here, and now we're going to start getting in on the movie, so just keep in mind that the spoilers are coming, and they're going to be coming heavy in here. So I meant to warn at the very beginning, and I just kind of got into my spiel, and forgot to. But yeah, the spoilers are coming. But, I think back to myself as I would have been 11 in 1990, but maybe thinking more of like the 12-year-old me who was really collecting in earnest in 1991, and who was like, anytime I saw a Deadpool issue on the stands, if I went to the flea market, with my $10 allowance and picked up as many books as I could. At that time, they were $10 a piece, or they were $1 a piece, and then they moved up to $1.25, so I went from being able to get 10 comics every week to 8 comics. And then, of course, once the double reverse holograms came in and all these other expensive things happened, I just got priced out of it. But thinking about the 12-year-old me who couldn't wait to go to the flea market every Sunday and blow my allowance on comics and bring them home and just look through them all like as carefully as possible so I could put them back in their bags with their Mylar board, the Mylar bags with the backing boards and all of that stuff. I feel like Deadpool and Wolverine is like the best approximation of that what I would have wanted a comic book movie to be. That's the best approximation of it. Now, whether I say it's my favorite or the best or any of those kinds of things, I don't know. I don't know where I'd rank it amongst other ones. Like, I don't know where I would rank it compared to like a Captain America and Winter Soldier or a Superman, or even something like a Black Panther that I really appreciated, really enjoyed. I don't know how you compare a Deadpool and Wolverine to a Black Panther. I don't know where the two of them, they're kind of like, even though they're both comic book movies, I feel like if you were gonna, if you're gonna tell me like, hey Matt, we need you to do one of those clickbaity, ranking movie kind of things, can you do one of those? So we just like, and give us like a blurb on why you picked each one. I don't know how I could rank these that way. I don't know where I would put Black Panther compared to Deadpool and Wolverine. But what I would say is like for example, Black Panther, 12-year-old Matt would have no expectations of what a Black Panther should be as a movie, but 40-year-old Matt, or however old I was when I saw that movie, was really impressed and really liked it and thought that's the movie that I would want Black Panther to be. It's essentially it's a version of Superman, right? But it covers all of the social issues that would be involved with the characters being with African American characters, but also with the main character himself being set in Africa. It covers all of those issues in a really great way, but yet still kind of sets out and makes a version of Superman that I thought was really fantastic. Whereas this movie is just kind of goofy fun, but goofy fun in a way that's like, hey, look at all these great characters that you love. We're just going to throw them in here. And I mean, the movie starts, right? I'm in the movie theater. It's probably like 10:30 at this point. So there was a 10:15 a.m. matinee that I went to, but it's probably like 10:30 at this point because of all the trailers and whatnot. And I'm eating my popcorn and I'm drinking my what was it called? Chimichanga Chaser. It was like the Coke Freestyle machine. That you push a button and it has a specific mix. It wasn't as good as the Toretto Twist I got last year for Fast X. But anyway, I'm kind of chowing down and sipping my soda and just being like, okay, this thing's gonna start. What do we got going on here? And we get Deadpool with like Wolverine's adamantium skeleton after he dies at the end of Logan. And he's just pulling off pieces of that and killing all the time cops, which was fantastic. I mean, right, the one thing that was missing when he was killing the time cops is that we should have had Jean-Claude Van Damme playing one of them, right? Just taking a adamantium rib right between the eyes, right? That would have been perfect. But, I mean, it's set to the tune of Bye, 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 which, again, I think that's, the way I was kind of thinking of Deadpool being a little bit age-specific in terms of appreciating a movie like this with him in it. Bye, 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 I think kind of the way that joke lands might be a little age specific, that you've got to be a certain age group that like you kind of okay with that song, right? You're kind of okay with NSYNC, but also you get the joke of him doing the choreographed dance move and all of that kind of stuff, and he's like doing the dances while in between like killing everybody and smashing people with Wolverine's skull and all of that. I mean, it's the most ridiculous scene that you could possibly get, but it's just so beautiful. And I was like, all right, I'm into this. You've got me. I'm already here. Well, let's go for it. And it just kind of continues from there, right? That like, the whole, they're playing Power of Love while while Deadpool is going through time. I should probably point out here before I get too deep in, I'm not going to do a synopsis. I'm just going to start breaking down pieces that I like. So there's no synopsis here like I usually do. So you don't have to hear me muddle through that, right? But when he's talking to the Time Cop authorities, there, what was the guy's name? Is it Brian McFadden? Let's see. I had it up here. Matthew McFadden. I should have known, right? He's a fellow Matthew. I should know that's Matthew McFadden. McFadden too, not McFadden. But he's like the kind of this head Time Cop guy who tells Deadpool like, hey, we can save you from your timeline that's dying because Wolverine's dead, but everybody else is going to die. And he's like, but if I just bring back Wolverine, then you'll save my timeline. And he grabs the Time Cop device or whatever and starts zipping through different timelines, and we see all these different Wolverines, right? And so we get the Henry Cavill one, right? The Calverine, I guess, where they make he makes a fourth wall joke about DC, which was fantastic. We get the 5'3" Wolverine, which I forgot that Wolverine in the comics is 5'3", because does he ever look like he's 5'3"? I mean, when Jim Lee was drawing him in that kind of X-Men, the new X-Men book that came out in 91, was he drawing a 5'3" Wolverine? I don't think so. He didn't look 5'3" in those. He just looked big and muscular, and he was ready to kick some ass. But anyway, so we get the 5'3" one. We get all these different. We get God, what was that issue? I think I had it listed here. I think I had it written down somewhere. The issue where he's on the X cross kind of thing. It's what was that? I did have it somewhere, and I've completely lost it. So, but it was like that was like slightly before I was collecting when that issue came out. So it was, I think it was like in the 75-cent period when I was like, I think I started like when it was like $1. I don't remember if I was in the 75-cent range, but yeah, that was an episode. Oh, here we go. It was 251, Uncanny X-Men 251. So that was actually $1 one. So that would have been right around when I was starting. So it says early November on the cover. So that might have been right around the time, that would have, maybe in 1990. So that might have been right before Deadpool's first appearance, actually, right? Because his would have been December, even though the issue would have been for like February, I think is what it was. So early November, right? That, because remember, comics would do like, they would sometimes go bi-weekly. There'd be a period of time where they kind of spit out 2 a month, and so But I remember that one where he was kind of on the X cross type thing there. So Wolverine, Deadpool shows up for that one. We get all kinds of different inside joke things like that. The Hulk is there for one of them. All that stuff is working really well. And then they get zapped into this area called the Void. And the thing that interests me about the Void is that I always kind of, with my own writing, my characters, like once the novel's done, it's almost like they go into a void in my head. And so I always have a piece in my novel where me as the author is like talking to the characters at some point. It's a little indulgent for sure, but like the very first one, Chad in Accounting, right? You see some of the other characters that I'm going to be using in other books that kind of are there. And so there's that. And of course, there's the other thing is, my friend, when he was studying abroad in England, he met a guy named Mads, and he said this guy Mads was like me. And I joked that Mads was my branch office in England. And then there was like this joke that like, everything that was kind of old for me would go to that branch office in England. So it's like, I was talking about the previous issue, or its previous episode about my movie theater behavior, but making fart noises like that like things like that would go in the England branch office, because I don't do that kind of stuff anymore. So it's kind of similar, I guess, to the Void, right? It's my England branch office run by Mads, the Norwegian, who I created a character named after him. Is this Boston confirmed bachelor kind of dandy character who's like worth like $300 million. He has this aristocrat friend Mads. He calls him his Norwegian companion. So it was based that off. But anyway, that idea of the Void is something that I kind of thought works in my book. So maybe that also landed particularly well with me, that I really like the idea of that. And I mean, they start off right away. We get like the Wolverine Deadpool fight that we're looking for in the Void. And then we get Chris Evans, and we're thinking like, oh, what's Captain America doing here, right? That's interesting. But it's not Captain America, right? And I kind of figured it out. Like I was like, oh wait, it can't be Captain America, right? Because he still exists in the timeline. No, it's but I guess no, there was a part of me that thought because he aged out, right, at the end of Avengers Endgame, that maybe they could say he went to the Void. But no, it's the Human Torch version of him. So we get that part there, and then they go and they face Cassandra Nova, who's a villain that they hadn't really used much in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But that was also kind of an interesting piece. It was kind of cool. I mean, I don't know how much I liked all of that stuff, but like, once they escape the void, right? And they're kind of out there. Then we get the other things, like we get the Ryan Reynolds version of Deadpool, right, where it's what do they call them, nice pool or hot pool? And I mean, then they're driving away in a Honda Odyssey to Avril Lavigne's I'm With You, which again is just, it's like fantastic stuff. But I get too why it might only land with a certain audience, right? Like only certain people are going to get a kick out of Avril Lavigne playing, right, with the two of them driving off in a Honda Odyssey with the coexist bumper sticker on the back. And then of course they fight again, Wolverine and Deadpool. They kind of just keep stabbing each other, which I could see like maybe where that kind of thing might get old because of their healing powers, they could just keep killing each other and coming back to life. But then we get the big reveal, right? And this is where like fanboy 12-year-old Matt would have just been dying. And to be honest, I think it's a little bit dangerous that they did this for 45-year-old Matt, who's getting up there in age, blood pressure's a little bit up. I've been eating popcorn and caffeinated soda for the past hour and a half or so. So I'm, probably not in the best shape for this kind of awesomeness that they're about to give me. And, so of course they've beaten the crap out of each other and their car gets driven off. And we're like, okay, where are they going with this car? What's going to happen here? They end up in this house kind of off somewhere, and Wolverine's drinking alcohol, and then Elektra walks in, right? Jennifer Garner's Elektra. Now, we knew that one was coming, right? We understood that one was going to happen. But she steps in a little bit further so that she can let somebody else walk in. It's like, who is this other person that's going to walk in? And I know Ty from Copus, when he saw it before me, he saw it on Tuesday, so he knew I was going to be watching it this past weekend. And he's like, I'm not going to tell you anything that happens in it, but I just know you're going to like some of this stuff. Well, he knew what was coming next. He knew how much I was going to love that. I mean, Wesley Snipes walks in as Blade, and it is the most beautiful thing ever. Again, a 45-year-old Matt is hard for him to contain himself, seeing how amazing that is. Again, I think with this movie, as you're starting to watch it, right, you realize because the void is just all kind of like relics of 20th Century Fox, that you're realizing that this has become not necessarily a love letter, but a thank you to the Fox movies. Which I think is an appreciative thing because remember, obviously Disney with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they were in direct competition with Fox. They were trying to kill Fox. They were doing everything they could to kill Fox, right? They were diminishing the X-Books so much so that people wouldn't want to go see the movies based on the X-Books, right? They were kind of going after each other. And so to kind of turn around and say like, hey, thank you for the contributions that you made to this. We wouldn't be here without these contributions. And you start to realize it's happening. But with Blade, right? Blade is pre that, right? Blade is New Line Cinema, which is a fascinating thing too because New Line Cinema was bought out by Time Warner. I guess it was originally bought by Turner, right? And then Turner merged with Time Warner. So technically those three Blade movies are owned by, Warner, by HBO Max, which is similar to how the old Batman series, which is, a DC character, that was owned by Fox, which is now owned by Disney. So I don't know if maybe they do some horse trading, and trade each other's properties there. I've heard too that there's a situation where maybe like Disney's going to include a bundle that has HBO Max in it, which could, so maybe you could just combine all this stuff together. But anyway, seeing Blade there was just absolutely amazing because Blade is the one who started it all, and I think if these are all going to be thank yous to the ones that came before, Blade needed the bigged thank you, and he was getting it. So now Blade walks in a little further, and I kind of had a sense of what was coming next, but I wasn't sure. And I'd heard that maybe they were going to do something with Channing Tatum's Gambit character, and sure enough, he walks in. And what was fascinating about that one is that Channing Tatum's Gambit character was another reminder of how badly Fox screwed everything up. Right? Because if Fox does this thing right, if they make this thing the way it's supposed to be, they've got, in the early 2010s, right, they've got Wolverine doing solo movies, Deadpool doing solo movies, Gambit doing solo movies, maybe some of the other characters, right, either doing solo movies or team-ups, right, something along those lines. But instead, they Gambit languishes in development hell. Wolverine, they screw up with the whole X-Men Origins Wolverine, but then they kind of bring it back a little bit. And then Deadpool, they give Deadpool such a hard time that they completely cut the budget because they're afraid of it being an R-rated movie. And then, of course, when they release Apocalypse, X-Men Apocalypse in 2016, I mean, Apocalypse is the kind of villain that you create like a 4 or 5 movie arc the way the Marvel Cinematic Universe did with Thanos. And instead it's just like one movie and you get Oscar Isaacs for one movie and that's it. He should have been menacing things in a Gambit movie, in a Deadpool movie, all of that. So kind of bringing it back. I mean, Gambit was really great to see. Really great to see him as this guy that never had his movie made, right? Because the other ones, it's almost like, I didn't get the ending that I want, right? Like Elektra, I didn't get the movie that I wanted. Blade's like, I could come back and get the respect that I'm due. But Gambit was like, they never made my movie. And it was almost like this, again, like a reminder of like Fox, like Disney saying to Fox, like, hey, we know how to do this stuff right, which they were doing it right, at least here. And then we get X-23, right, who's a little bit older at this point. She's like 19, I guess, for her character's age. But, we'd seen her in Logan. I think everybody really liked her in Logan. So to see her a little bit older now, and in this movie, it was a great team up. Now, where some of my nitpicks are with this team up, I mean, I would like to have had a Punisher in there. They mentioned Punisher. They mentioned that I think Deadpool makes a joke about how there like 3 or 4 Punishers. So that's disappointing. I know with Daredevil, I don't know if there was some concerns between the breakup with him and Jennifer Garner, if that's why he wasn't in it, or if he was asked and he just didn't want to do it. That would have been interesting to have him, right? We would have liked to have seen Daredevil in there. But then the biggest one for me was Ghost Rider, Nicolas Cage's Ghost Rider, and with Sony kind of being like, okay, you can have our Spider-Man stuff, but also too, Ghost Rider's rights reverted back to Marvel Studios and Disney in 2013. So similar to Blade, right, where Blade's rights reverted back, so they could use Wesley Snipes playing the character, right? They might not be able to use clips from the movie or something like that, but they could use him playing the character. They could have had Nicolas Cage as Ghost Rider in that. I would have loved to have seen that. That would have made it just absolutely beautiful for me, but they didn't. Of course, the other one that wasn't in the movie was Cable, and I know Josh Brolin expressed disappointment about not being in the film, but I do kind of wonder if maybe with Wolverine, if it might have been too much, because again, Rob Liefeld talked about how when he created Cable, he was creating his own Wolverine. Though it's funny, he was creating his own Wolverine, but when you think of it, he's like the most Liefeldian, is that the term? Liefeldian of his of all the characters he's created, because he's just put everything on him, right? Like, we'll give him the glowing eye, we'll give him the metal arms, we'll give him the vest with all the weapons, we'll give him the scars. Let's just throw it all together and make him this character. But again, as a 12-year-old kid, I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I loved Cable, and so I think it would have been nice to have Cable in there as well. So those were the kind of the 3 that I would have liked to have seen that we didn't get. 4, right? So of course, 45-year-old Matt is turning into 12-year-old Matt, just being like, let's just put everybody in this, let's throw them all in there, which it's still, I get it, would have been nice, but by the same token, what we got there is exactly what I would have wanted there, or not exactly what I would, but it worked enough to make 12-year-old Matt happy. Yeah, I mean, one of the ones I was thinking about was the issue that was available when I was collecting was I think it was called Heart of Darkness, something like that, where it had Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Daredevil, and Punisher all fighting Mephisto, which I'd heard that they wanted Mephisto to be the baddie for this, and then they went with Cassandra Nova instead. I think they thought it would work easier. And I get it, because I think they're a good villain in this. I think Emma Corrin is a good villain for this, so it works in that sense. But yeah, I mean, it was a team up akin to that one, that Hearts of Darkness kind of thing. And so it brought me back to that, seeing that team there, and just watching them get after it and fight. And again, they brought in some baddies from the old Fox movies, like Pyro, or Lady Deathstrike, Juggernaut, and those ones. They brought them in, so you got to see them like fighting against, and just watching Blade getting after it, and then of course Gambit, right? We never really got to see a good Gambit, so to see Gambit with his charged cards blowing people up and stuff, it was such a thing of beauty. And then of course I think again with Elektra, seeing Elektra sort of get redemption for how poorly that Elektra movie was made, because it wasn't bad because of her performance, right? She turns in a really great performance, and it was I think she wanted a second chance with that, and I think that's why she took this part in this role, and she gets to do that, right? She gets to have that redemption piece there, which I really appreciated all of that stuff. one of the things I liked about this is there all the fourth wall breaking, of course, that you get from Deadpool, which, I think when I was collecting comics, he didn't necessarily do that. I think I do remember some issues where he would like be talking, and I think they were having it like he was talking to himself, but it felt like he was talking to us. Like I remember one of the early X-Force issues, he was attacking Cable's compound with the other X-Force team members in it. He was watching Shatterstar train, and he was like talking about how good Shatterstar was, but that also he had recognized like 12 weaknesses in his technique that he could exploit. And it's like, well, who is he telling that to, right? I think they were making it like he was talking to himself, but I think it was also that the start of him breaking the fourth wall. But when I was collecting, it was She-Hulk that broke the fourth wall, right? That was the big thing. She was doing that all the time. I would have bought She-Hulk comics at that time because when they were 10 for $10, right, you'd go to the where I always say the flea market. That was probably where I bought most of my comics at. And that flea market, I think, is now it's a Walmart. But I mean, it was like you'd go into that flea market. It was like this big open space. It was like a bingo hall other times a day, and there'd be these tables, and so you'd have the tables with the comic books. There'd be like women selling like Avon on tables, and then our neighbor who lived next door, she was like, she when she passed, she was in her 90s. So I guess at that time in the early 90s, she would have been in her 60s, right, her mid 60s, but she would kind of work there, and so like that's why my parents didn't feel bad about dropping us off. Which the idea of that does sound kind of rough, like a 12-year-old just going in there to haggle with like middle-aged adult comic book vendors. But that's what we did back then. But it was a great thing. So I was kind of grabbing everything. I was reading everything. So I remember reading some She-Hulk comics where she broke the fourth wall. But we get a lot of that in here, and the areas that we get it that I think were really fantastic is we get sort of these criticisms of Disney movies and Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that everybody's been thinking, and to have Deadpool making them, I think to some extent shows that maybe Marvel, that Kevin Feige and other executives at Marvel Studios recognize some of the issues that have come up. I mean, they mention about the having to do homework kind of piece where, there are times where Deadpool's telling us where they're getting some of this stuff from in previous things. Like, oh, that was in, whatever, Loki season 2, episode 5 or something like that. So we get that. But also, towards the end of the movie, right, he says to the audience, hey, just giving you guys a heads up, this movie's almost over, right? Because, these Marvel movies were getting bloated, right? They're getting 2.5, 3 hours long. And this movie was only 2:08, I think it was, or 2 hours and 8 minutes. So it wasn't even that long, but he's telling us like, hey, we're going to be done here soon. We have the Deadpool core, right? Which is probably the most beautiful scene of the movie, right? Is that the Deadpool core shows up, and Wolverine and Deadpool have to fight all of these different Deadpools. And Deadpool comes up and says it's the big thing about how we're tired of the multiverse, we're tired of all these different versions of things and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, yeah, that's why we're coming to kill you. We're going to kill all the timelines. We're going to let Cassandra Nova kill all the timelines so we don't have this whole multiverse thing. And then, Wolverine pulls his cowl down. So he's got like that classic Wolverine cowl that we haven't seen him with at all since he's been doing the Hugh Jackman Wolverine. And they cue up Madonna's Like a Prayer, which I guess that was a huge piece of the budget. I guess it cost a lot of money for them to get that. And when they went to Madonna to ask her if they could use the song, she gave some suggestions for how the scene should go. But it's such a beautiful scene, right? And it is in a way like it's kind of like a metaphor for the kind of multiverse situation that Marvel found themselves in, where they kind of overwrote themselves into this thing where it's kind of a low stakes, high confusion environment. And they kind of do that, right? Because you've got Wolverine, Deadpool just slaughtering all of these Deadpool, this Deadpool core, right? All these different versions of Deadpool, and then when they get to the other side, they all come back to life, right? Because they're all regenerating. That's kind of the multiverse, right? Is that it's big, it's confusing, it's messy, but also it's there. You can kind of do whatever you want with it, right? And it's always it's always going to be there, right? You can always kind of go back to it, and so. I think for me overall, because we're kind of, I was saying 45 minutes. I think I'm going to go a little long here. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but as we get to the end here, I think what I like the most about this, and I'm worried because I don't know that they're going to go this route with this, but it feels like what they were setting up, because the way the movie ends is you go back to Deadpool's timeline. He's there, right, with Wolverine, had a party. X-23's there with him. Some of his other, Deadpool friends are there. Vanessa is ready to get back together with him and all of that. And there's a sense of like, okay, things are back the way they should be, but like, yeah, they could also continue from here. And there's almost a sense of like, okay, all of these Fox movies, the same way that all those Spider-Man Sony movies, they're all technically part of the MCU now, right? We can say they've been canonized in a way. But there's almost this sense that like they're on their own thing, that they're allowed to exist on their own thing. So like you could keep making Deadpool movies and they don't have to be intertwined with all of the other stuff that's going on. So like you can make another Deadpool movie with or without Wolverine, and it has nothing to do with Captain America, what are they calling that? Brave New World, right? The one with Anthony Mackie. Can have nothing to do with that. But then it's like, oh, if we need Deadpool to help us fight Doctor Doom, and when we bring him with Robert Downey Jr. into like one of these later Avengers movies, we can just pluck him out of that timeline. You could just have Jean-Claude Van Damme and the other time cops come in and just pull him out of that timeline, and then he can help fight Doctor Doom, and then you just pluck him back and put him back there, and he can again go on his own missions and stuff. That's how I'd like to see this happen. That's how I'd like to see this work. I think it would be fantastic if they did it that way. I don't think they're going to do it that way. I think they're going to mess with it. They're going to screw with this whole thing. Is it going to be as bad as the Deadpool and X-Men Origins Wolverine? Probably not. But I feel like it's not going to come off the way I would like to see it happen. I don't think it's going to work that way. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will happen. As we're wrapping up here, I mean, again, this movie release came at the same time as sort of Marvel's big announcements at San Diego Comic-Con that, they were turning the page from Jonathan Majors as Kang, and they were going to bring back Robert Downey Jr. to play Doctor Doom. And I think people were wrapping the Deadpool Wolverine movie in with this announcement here. It's this whole thing of like Marvel saying, man, we screwed up, like pushing the envelope with things. Let's just go back to what everybody likes and what everybody knows, and we'll kind of lean on that for a little bit and then kind of grow more slowly from there. I don't think Deadpool and Wolverine is the same thing as bringing Robert Downey Jr. back to be Doctor Doom. Because Deadpool and Wolverine felt like this sense of like, yeah, we have been diminishing and crapping on the X books for so long. Let's give them, the end that they deserve, give them the respect that they deserve and all of that. But also leave the door open to kind of keep using them, kind of keep doing stuff with them in their timelines. We've got those timelines there now. They exist, right? I think had they completely killed off Deadpool's timeline, and even if they just pulled some of his other friends over with him, but they still killed the timeline, then we'd know, like, okay, they're done with all that stuff. It's all completely done. Whereas in this case, it's like, yes, they're putting a bow on it, but that bow is also something that can be pulled apart, and that we could go back to these timelines. And I think that's a nice piece there. But again, I think thanking those or giving the proper respect to those is different from Marvel saying, like, man, we are out of ideas. Let's bring in Robert Downey Jr. because everybody likes him so much and see if this works. The other thing I think Deadpool Wolverine says about the Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man is that as much as you want to try to kind of use some of these ancillary characters and make them bigger. So obviously the big one, Iron Man was never anywhere close to a top 5 Marvel character until Robert Downey Jr. plays him, and everybody really resonated with that character and they really liked it. Guardians of the Galaxy wasn't even like top 20, top 30, right? I remember that book. That was one of the, talking about, bringing my $10 to the flea market. I wasn't touching Guardians of the Galaxy, right? I wasn't picking that book up. I wasn't going anywhere near that one. And it seemed like they kept always trying to reboot it, and it would fall off. I can't remember if it was Mark Silvestri that did that one. One of them, I can't remember. One of the names in Image, I think, did work on that book for a little bit before they went over to Image. But, I mean, the success with that, I think it gave Marvel this idea that, like, we don't need Wolverine, we don't need Deadpool, we don't need Spider-Man. We just need all of these. We can make our own, versions of these. And, of course, when Sony comes to them and says, hey, kind of, what do you say if maybe we let you have our Spider-Man and we kind of co-produce these ones with him in it? I think to some extent, I think Disney, of course, jumped at it because they probably knew deep down how big Spider-Man would be for them, and what kind of a boon that would be. And of course, his movies have been hugely successful for them. I mean, I think that going to this Deadpool one, right? The last big one was the Spider-Man one that brought in $1.9 billion. But I think that this has to. I would hope that Deadpool and Wolverine shows that there is that you can't just keep taking these ancillary characters and trying to make them bigger. Obviously Black Panther has worked really well, but I think Chadwick Boseman was a huge part of that. But even like that, the sequel did well enough. And again, Guardians of the Galaxy, they kind of established that audience. But you saw with the Eternals, it didn't work with them. Ant-Man it has a ceiling. Obviously with the Marvels. So I think with the Marvels, I think that if you're there was a sense that maybe they were going to move from Robert Downey Jr. when he was done making these movies to Brie Larson's Captain Marvel. And if that was the case, they needed to do a better job of setting her up and making her successful. She should have been appearing in other people's movies the way Iron Man appeared in other people's movies. They should have been building something bigger so that when they got to that movie, it was more anticipated, and they just didn't do that. The movie that was anticipated for Marvel fans in 2023 was the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. It wasn't the Captain Marvel one, and I think if they wanted her to be, because that was my sense, is that I think she was the one who was most capable of taking over the mantle of kind of the anchor for the MCU with Robert Downey Jr. leaving. But now they've kind of given it up, and they're like, no, let's just bring Robert Downey Jr. back. But I think you see that like Ryan Reynolds and Wolverine show that when you've got like those biggest names, right? Those Spider-Man, Wolverine, Deadpool, those are what move the needle. Those are the names. And if you do the movie well, which this one, I think this movie is done really well. It does what you need it to do. When you make the movie well, and you make it true to those characters, I think it's the biggest piece, is that if people who are fans of those characters think that what they're seeing is authentic, the money is there. The billions are there. And I hope that they recognize that and say, instead of like trying to like create something out of these ancillary characters just because we got it to work with Guardians of the Galaxy and we got it to work with Iron Man and Thor and whoever else that are kind of lower tier characters. We got it to work with them. We got $1 billion out of Black Panther. We got $1 billion out of Captain Marvel. We can just keep doing that kind of thing. No, you're Fox. I'm sorry, you're Disney. You got all the characters now, right? You got all of them. You've got Spider-Man. You've got Wolverine. You got Deadpool. That should be your next movie. It should just be the three of them going out there and kicking ass. I don't know. That's maybe that's 12-year-old Matt talking again, right? Wanting to see the three of them go out and kick ass and do that kind of thing. But yeah, I think as I'm wrapping up here, I'm hoping that this movie is a sign that they're recognizing that they're power characters. They should be doing more with them. Not that they shouldn't be trying things with other characters. I think there are ways that you can do it. I think it's not just Disney Plus series, though. I think you need movies with the kind of the lesser characters that aren't expected to pull in $1 billion, right? So what if you have 3 movies in a year, and the Marvel, the Deadpool and Wolverine is the one that is going to be your $1 billion earner, but what if you do kind of like John Wick, and what if you do a movie that's like, a $40 or $50 million budget, and it pulls in, 150, 200 million, right? So maybe it's not a top 10 earner that year, but it gets people in the theater. They want to see something else, and it kind of gives you you can kind of slowly build those characters. So maybe instead of saying like, okay, here's the Eternals, just go watch it and love it and spend $1 billion on it. Instead of that, what if you kind of build them a little bit more and some lesser projects so that, there's not the impetus to have to make a lot of money right away, but also that because I understand the complaint that, when I'm saying, hey, Spider-Man, Wolverine, Deadpool, right, it's kind of like, okay, you're just bringing back old white guys, right? Robert Downey Jr., another old white guy, right? I guess Spider-Man's not old, right? Tom Holland's not old, but if Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield play them, they're a little bit older. Right, I get that point, but I think you can build them. I mean, Disney Plus is now starting to show a profit, so maybe there's a place for direct-to-streaming movies, right? You can bring them direct to Hulu or direct to Disney Plus, and maybe you don't have the huge budget for them, but you can do that. And now that we also have this idea that we're not connecting everything to the MCU, that you've got some space to really make some interesting things there, right? You call up Olivia Munn and say, hey, do you want to make a Psylocke movie? It'll be like an hour and 45 minutes long. Budget's going to be like $45 million. Probably the hugest chunk of that budget's going to be for you. We're going to bring in a couple of baddies that people like, and we're going to, and we're going to put it direct to Hulu and see what it does. I'm hoping that this movie kind of opens the door to more of that kind of thing. But I think this was the movie that Marvel needed, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe needed, and it worked. And again, 12-year-old Matt was at least a really big fan of it, so we'll call it good there. So yeah, so why don't we wrap up here? I went close to an hour here, so I kind of went a little bit crazy again. But in terms of plugs, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's where you can find links to the podcast. To all my reviews are there. Also my novels. My most recent novel, Don's House in the Mountains, currently on Kindle and paperback, so you can pick that up if you want. Obviously, yeah, Don and all those characters, they're chilling in the Matt void, right, for Matt's characters right now. So we'll see. Maybe they're kind of having to deal. Who knows what they're doing right now? If they're having to deal with big smoke monster kind of thing and all that kind of stuff. Like, unfortunately, they're there in the void though. So, but hey, if you want to pick them up and grab their books, you can see them while they're not in the void. You can see what they're doing there. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling here. So thank you all for listening, and we'll be back soon. All right, bye everyone.